Hey, readers and writers.
Welcome to episode 106 of Read and Write, where we're going to talk about
Multimedia writing, research, and organization.
how's your mouth feel? Tired?
I think I actually put a little bit of country slang in there somehow.
Sometimes it makes it flow a little easier. I'm Jocelyn.
And I'm Deb, and this is our podcast about what we're reading
What we're writing.
and everything in between.
Yeah, and this is like an interesting, it's about writing, but it's also a little in between too, because when you're thinking about multimedia research and whatnot, we're going to go all over the place.
It's basically the stuff that I do when I'm procrastinating about not actually writing my story.
Yeah, exactly.
This is how to procrastinate on the internet. That's all this episode is.
They tell you that it's all writing, so why not? Speaking of procrastinating, though, how have you been? What's up? Anything new?
I got an awesome pair of pants.
Oh, do tell. People might not think this is exciting, but trust us. Finding like a good pair of pants.
Oh no, it's not what you're thinking. These are the butt ugliest, biggest pants you've ever seen in your life.
But are they comfortable?
They are the most comfortable pants I've ever worn in my ever.
There it is.
I was on the quest of it's getting hot and hotter and hotter and hotter.
Yes.
And I just I want something to bum around in, and I got I got these linen t-shirts from Gap, and I love these things. So I went searching for linen. I wanted linen pants, and I found these ugly ass pants. they're tie-dye. They're like rose mauve tie-dye, and they're wide leg. And I've already washed them, and they just keep getting softer.
Oh my God.
I'm not kidding when I say these are the ugliest pants in existence.
You need to tell the people where you found these.
Old Navy on clearance.
Yes, I'm there.
You gotta go quick because they might not be there much longer because they were on clearance because they were ass ugly.
Yeah, that's true. But, I will find something like it. I will find something like it. I mean, you're talking about my culture here. I grew up in the Ithaca, New York area. And for folks who don't know, that is a safe haven. That's a safe haven for aging hippies who are addicted to their linen pants. So if I can't find them online, I'm in good company then. Yeah, I will just go right to the source, the spring, if you will, of linen pants.
Well, they are so comfortable. They're dangerously comfortable. It's I want to sleep in them, and I want to wake up and stay in them. I want to stay in them all day. I want to lounge in them at night. I'm like, where does this vicious cycle end?
Ooh,
I just live in these pants until they get dirty, and then I wash them, then I dry them, and I put them back on. Because they get softer with every wash and dry.
Oh, yes. Oh, I love it.
We once were gifted a pair of white linen sheets for our bed. I think it was a wedding thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is this crazy thing? It's so uncomfortable. It's so scratchy. I hate it. Mm-hmm. And then they became my favorite sheets, and I was sad when they died.
Yeah,
because they just get softer the more you use them and the more you wash them. And I was so angry that our dog tore the dog they do the scratch thing before they lay down and stuff.
They gotta get comfy.
Yeah, and his nail went right through and tore a thing, and I was like, oh no. How can I save these sheets and use them for something else?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, linen sheets they're like a nice way to treat yourself. If you're someone who can afford linen sheets and you want to do something nice for yourself, that's a good idea. Treat yourself to a set of linen sheets.
I've looked at linen sheets since, and I'm like, man, I don't know if I can take that financial plunge.
They're very expensive. Now they're really trendy too. They've become
so it's
trendier.
Becoming more expensive.
Yes, yeah. I think when you guys got your set for your wedding, you were well ahead
of the trend.
Yes. But the past couple of years, they've really kind of blossomed, and everybody's obsessed with them now.
I do love my linen pants. They breathe. They're comfortable. I mean, I never want to take these things off, and that's dangerous because they are not attractive.
No. Well,
not in any shape, way, or form. They are baggy. They add all the weight in all the wrong places.
That no longer becomes important When the linen takes you, it doesn't matter anymore.
I thought you were going to say that no longer is important in a long-term relationship.
Well, that too.
I was kind of sort of saying the same thing to my husband. It's like, I'm glad this is the long-term relationship and you have seen me in these pants, because I don't know how you could have dated me and seen me in these pants in the first place.
When, when they embrace you at your linen pant stage of life, you know that it's
way beyond peeing in front of them stage.
Yes, yes. It is the unspoken stage that comes away later. Oh, I love it. I'm going to fetch myself a pair.
They're so ugly, but they are so gorgeously comfortable.
I love it. I love to hear it. Love to hear about it.
So what's going on in your life? Any linen pants to discuss?
No, but I really, I wish I had them for the thing that has been taking over my entire life. So recently, to the date that we're recording this, but not, I think, when it airs, StokerCon happened. And for folks who don't know, StokerCon is the horror literary conference that happens every year. It's hosted by the Horror Writers Association and other various supporting organizations. And it's a time to celebrate
dress up as vampires and walk around.
Oh, yeah. Well, you could. But it's...
You say con, so I immediately start thinking people like dressed in like costume.
Weirdly enough, it's not that much of a con.
Oh, okay.
It's not con.
Color me surprised.
I know. It's a writer's con. It's for writers. Yeah. So, I mean, you would be embraced if you dressed up. Every costume, every style of goth vibe, any sort of inclination is pretty much accepted. The horror writing community is one of the greatest communities I've ever had the pleasure of witnessing, and I, feel weird saying that I'm a part of it because I still haven't really written anything lately. But they're just wonderful people, absolutely wonderful people. So StokerCon was virtual because of COVID. It was virtual last year as well, of course. And so I camped out for, what was it, like 3-4 days, and just crammed as much digital content into my eyeballs as I could possibly handle. And it became a problem because the programming that was provided for this conference was just so overwhelming. There was so much stuff, and it was all amazing. There were live panels, there were pre-recorded panels, there were pre-recorded author readings, there were pitch sessions, there's this writing academy thing that they do where you can sign up for classes. There's also other conferences couched within StokerCon. So there's the Anne Radcliffe Academic Conference, which were all this year pre-recorded academic presentations about the horror genre, both in writing and in mythology, folklore, and movies, things like that.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and then they also have a librarian's day. So there's like a full day of content specifically focused towards me.
It sounds like by moving to the digital, they kind of like really expanded all the options. Yes. Because if you go to the physical thing, you only have you only can go to this room at 1 o'clock, and you can go that lasts for 2 hours, and you can go to this room at 4. Yeah. But by offering it digitally, you just got all of it.
Yes. And it became very overwhelming. Like, a lot of us had spreadsheets, and we were all like trying to figure out, where we were going to go next. They also had these.
It sounds like me at the Renaissance Festival.
Very much. Yeah, you have to organize. You need a plan of attack. But they also had these open kind of like Zoom chat rooms that they were calling the bar, because normally at conferences, you could go to a bar or a restaurant or whatever is in the conference area and like hang out. Homies. Yeah, and so they had a couple rooms open for that. So it was just amazing. I got so many wonderful ideas for things to do with my library. I got great ideas for writing. I learned a bunch of new things. It was really a great experience, and I'm so happy that I got to do it and that it was virtual and that it still happened and that COVID didn't ruin it. And then something else fun that happens during StokerCon is the Bram Stoker Awards, which are the big literary awards for the horror genre. So that happened, and my favorite book from last year won the Superior Achievement in, I believe they say long form fiction, or, it was a novel, a Superior Achievement novel, which was The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones.
That's what I asked. What was the book?
Yeah, that book is so good. It is one of the most fascinating approaches to telling a story that I think I've ever encountered. And I loved the content. It's basically a revenge story told from it's really hard to talk about this book without giving anything away.
Okay.
A group of young Blackfeet men kind of they do it. There's a transgression that happens in their youth. They take something that's not theirs, and they kind of cross some lines that traditionally in Blackfeet culture and society are frowned upon. And it comes back to bite them. And that's pretty much as far as I'm going to go with trying to explain it. But I will say that I have never read a story before where an animal was haunting people. So, it's just...
So when it comes back to bite them, does it come back to bite them literally?
Yes.
Are we talking werewolf here?
No, it's... Okay, so I guess spoilers for anyone who hasn't read The Only Good Indians. They kill elk that aren't theirs to kill. And they kill way more elk than they are supposed to or ever should. There's more meat than they could ever eat or store, and they actually had no intention to eat or store any of it. They were just killing. They were taken over by killing, basically. And it's kind of like this disturbing moment in their youth, and so they run away from that mentally, and some of them leave the res, and then a decade later this entity kind of arises and starts hunting them down. And it's interesting because the entity is the spirit of the elk, but it takes different form, and it's scary. It's really scary. Sometimes it is an elk. Other times it's this elk woman. Other times it is just a woman, but an uncanny woman. She's reborn in all these ways, and it's just, the story is told from multiple different perspectives, including the elk entity, and really, really digs deep into just so much. So there's so much packed into this book. Anyway, I was really happy that it won the Bram Stoker.
For some reason, it's making me think of the Amityville Horror, where the pig was the scariest part of the book for me.
Sometimes animals, for some reason, I always kind of, I don't know, take animals for granted in terms of a scare. But the elk really did terrify me. And other people will say this too who have read this book, but I will never think about ceiling fans in the same way again. And it's not what you think. It's not what you think. I know some people think something scary with a ceiling fan. Oh, someone's head got chopped up. No, it's something totally weird, and it's terrifying.
Well, I have to say, you not wanting to give anything away was a fine description of the book, but you telling more of the spoilers makes me not want to read it. So now I'm going to have to look up this book and terrify myself and keep it in the freezer in the meantime.
Yes. Also, though, I will give a trigger because I know this really bothers some folks. Animal cruelty, not just of the elk, but dogs.
Oh.
So if you are sensitive to dog death, yes.
Okay, never mind. That's a line I have a hard time crossing.
It's pretty bad in this one too. It's brief, but it's brutal.
Mm-hmm. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. It's ever since I had kids, I can't watch anything where a kid gets hurt or killed or something on a TV. I just can't do it. Mm-hmm. I'm just nope, sorry, I'm done. Yeah,
that is a common experience and totally understandable.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not alone. My husband is kind of what? It's just it's not real. It's the same thing we tell the kids about monsters. It's not real. And I'm I can't help it. I have an emotional attachment here.
Yeah, it's too easy to let it kind of leak into your thoughts and percolate and take form.
To totally go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, when I was pregnant with my second and caring for my first, I was listening to an audiobook, or maybe I was watching a documentary series, just like by basically being hugely pregnant and having a small child.
Yeah.
But it was this, I think it was a documentary, but it was about a pedophile, and that was the worst thing I could have ever done to myself. Like, I constantly think about it, and then just, like, almost get physically ill.
Yeah. I mean, there are real hormones that are triggered in your body to elicit a response.
Yeah. Like, physically sick, just thinking about it these days. Like, just, can't do it.
Yeah. And there's no need. That's the thing. You know what you can handle. Everyone knows what they can handle. And there's really no need to push that. If you know it's going to bother you.
If you know you have a trigger, then just don't go there.
Yeah.
No matter how good the book sounds.
Exactly. Don't worry about it. No one, well, some people might be assholes, but like not here. Not Jocelyn and Deb. We won't be jerks.
We don't think we're assholes.
No, yeah. I mean,
you might think we're assholes sometimes, but by our definition, we don't think we're assholes.
We're perfectly pleasant people.
We just like books.
Yeah.
Well, we like stories. That's our.
We like stories.
We like stories
in all forms.
Speaking of, how do you research your story, Jocelyn?
Oh,
no, that's too broad of a question. We're specifically talking about the multimedia aspects of researching. And Pinterest, we're looking at you.
Yeah. Well, research, librarian. I love it. I love to research. I love helping other people research. It's something I talk about daily. It's so satisfying. It's so satisfying to guide someone through the jungles of information, and like teaching them about research.
The card catalog.
Oh, I wish we still had some card catalog.
That's what came to mind. Teaching someone about the card catalog. Like, that's gotta be
they're so
sad.
magical. I love card catalogs. But, research is so cyclical in academics and also in writing and in creative pursuits. You start off with an idea, you follow a path, you learn something, you formulate a new idea, you pivot, you go down another path. You're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back constantly. That's how research works. It's an informed conversation that you're having with your own thoughts and with the other scholars or contributors to this body of information. That's called scholarly conversation. That is how it works. And when you're talking about academics.
That sounds wonderful, but we're talking about multimedia research. Basically, we're talking about Pinterest.
I mean, it's the same thing.
Is it?
Yeah.
There's no conversation happening. We're just procrastinating
there is a conversation
on the internet.
It's definitely a conversation, Deb. You're having the conversation with yourself and your own ideas, and you're having a conversation with the creative output of other people, or, research, depending on what project you're doing. If there is factual information that you have to feed into your project, then, you are consuming that factual information through your research and then commenting on it via your project.
Okay.
That is a conversation.
I stand corrected.
So, I think most research these days really is multimedia, if you think about it.
Yeah, it really has to be. I said it really has to be.
It has to be. Yeah,
especially
it has to be.
I'm very visual, so a lot of my research is pictures.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, YouTube, I think, has become a really wonderful resource for creative people on every end of the journey of a creative project. When you're researching, when you're creating, and when you're distributing. So, using YouTube to look up, you mentioned, I think it was last episode, you were using, you were trying to find a specific sound.
Yep. My obscure Japanese cicada in the summer sound.
Yeah. And
I found it on YouTube.
Yeah. See, YouTube is a wonderful resource for that. And, I'm working on a project right now that takes place in the Finger Lakes. So being reminded of what the water sounds like lapping up against the shore when you are at a Finger Lake, that is a very specific sound. It's not the same as when you're at the ocean. It's not the same as when you're at a Great Lake or a river. It is very particular because these are smaller lakes. They're deep lakes. the water has its own qualities, and the beach, the shorelines have their own qualities as well. So you want to be reminded of these things, and you can find those visceral sensory details using things like YouTube or looking up pictures with, Google Photo is nice. Pinterest, you had mentioned Pinterest earlier. I use Pinterest a lot to do research, but also the other part of our conversation today, to organize. So,
Yes.
That's kind of a 1-2 punch for me. And when we're thinking about organizing, I'm sure we'll get to there later on, but Pinterest is really the only thing I use when I'm organizing things creatively, other than if you're talking about multimedia content.
Yeah, like we're not talking about pages to Wikipedia. We're talking about the other aspects of research. Like it's mostly audiovisual, I would probably assume, when we're talking about multimedia research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you really want to go down that rabbit hole, my information brain could make a case that Wikipedia is multimedia as well, but we don't have to go.
No, we're not going down that. We're strictly going audiovisual.
We're gonna just do basic. I love to talk about, getting nitty gritty on like what is information, what is media. That's my own philosophical, yes. Anyone want to talk about that? Hit me up. I would love to.
I'm not saying that Wikipedia doesn't have its place, but we're talking, like, usually, like, I'll end up at Wikipedia and then end up going to Pinterest looking for, like, an artist's interpretation of. Or actually, no, it doesn't usually take that art. I'll end up at Wikipedia looking for, let's say, this obscure sand demon, which may or may not be something I've actually looked up. Which then leads me to Google looking for artist interpretation of, which then leads me to Pinterest because somebody else has pinned it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's make a new board and save this to that board.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you can make a mood board and like a concept board, all of that with Pinterest. You just keep building.
Exactly. This is just one big Pinterest infomercial right now.
I know, right? Pinterest. Do you use any, or are there any other places that you look for multimedia content when you're in your research phase? If
I focus strictly on images, then it generally goes to Google Images first. Mm-hmm. Just looking up, and there's just so much content on Pinterest that it feels like every third picture I'm looking at on Google Images will take me to Pinterest.
Yes,
that's actually kind of got to the point where I kind of avoid it because I may not necessarily be looking. Yeah, Pinterest is good in its own right, and yes, I have boards devoted to different aspects of different stories or different characters, or like you said, mood boards, or just pictures that inspire me, or that pictures somehow represent something I'm already writing about, which was really weird in one story. I was having a hard time. I knew what a monster looked like in my head, and I was trying to find something to like put it down visually, and then I found it on Pinterest, like, that was in my head. How did... Yay! I just thought of this. How did somebody else think of this too? And I'm like... And then you start thinking, oh my God. But anyways, so that rabbit hole avoided. Yeah, I have started avoiding Pinterest because I'm actually looking for the source of the image, because I also want to know if they've done any other interpretations of it, or what their other work looks like, because I like artists.
Interesting. Well, yeah, that is always nice to kind of find the originators, and
sometimes it's nice to find that they've done the subject you're looking for, but they've done multiple studies of it, or even if they share their sketches of it before they actually start working on it. That's always a really beautiful treasure trove to find.
Yeah. And
it's
that can
rare,
that can really help inspire,
right,
and get your creative juices flowing. I have another, I wanted to kind of throw this at you and see if you had this experience at all. Have you ever kind of played around, if we're thinking multimedia, and if we're thinking this in the truest form, have you ever played around with like exploring tactile things like fabrics, or cooking, or going to a museum or anywhere to look at clothing that was of the era, or artifacts, like that sort of thing? Have you ever kind of gone in that direction? I've never
done a story that required that, but I will say this one the story I'm mainly working on right now, which if you join in for the 6 a.m. writing sessions, the one I'm currently writing, has to do a lot with these deep, dense, dark woods.
Mm-hmm.
And our family goes on evening walks every now and again, basically when I force them to. But there is one portion of our walk, like this one little sliver, that's like, yes, that's sort of what we want. And I always just edge closer to it or just kind of stop and stare at it. I want to walk through it, but it's private property and I probably shouldn't. But it's like a nice little glimpse, like, that's how the leaves move. That's what the sunlight looks like on that floor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's how the trees are all bare because all the leaves are at the top. You know, it's just, that's as close as I've gotten, probably.
Yeah, just observing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember things from my youth because the story is largely inspired by my grandparents' house where I spent a large portion of my youth. So I remember that forest, and this one reminds me of that one. Even though it's a tiny little sliver. It's not really a forest. It's like a piece of wooded thing on somebody's land, but...
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had to rely on some memories for those kinds of things as well with the stories that I'm writing right now. I have, though, tried recipes.
Yeah?
That I want my characters to also make. I'm like, well, I feel like I should know how to make this, what it tastes like, how annoying it is, or not annoying.
I'm not sure I get as far as food with characters. Like, I'm not sure I know what Tad's favorite sandwich is.
Well, it's only if I'm writing a scene where they have to cook it, or they have to serve it, or, you know, because it's a bigger thing. It's not necessarily just something they eat and don't like or like.
There we'd be heading towards a personal Deb pet peeve, food in books.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's something I wanted to discuss at a later point in another episode, maybe tie it in, but I could discuss it here. Just how much I dislike it. And I just what I do is I really dislike when a writer, say the character is making a special dinner for the special someone, like it's probably like a romance or something, the thing I'm describing, and they describe how they made pork chops with asparagus and a sauce, and I'm like, is that really necessary? How does this pertain to the plot? I don't care what this food looks like, tastes like, or smells like unless it has something to do with the plot.
Yeah.
That annoys the shit out of me when people over-describe something that has absolutely... maybe it's me. Maybe it's my style. I think you should only describe what's important. Like, I've gone so far as, like, I don't tell you what my characters look like.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting. I agree with you on being sparse about character description because it's nice to let folks do that in their head.
It's nice to let them have the picture in their head.
Yeah,
that they then can get pissed off about when somebody watches the movie.
Yeah, but then that lets the reader have ownership a little bit over the characters, you know, and like craft them into what they want to see. And I'm a little like in between with the food. I like food in books, but I don't like unnecessary description across the board, not just food. But I do like when food is important to the story or the character. Oh yeah,
then I'm totally on board.
Yeah.
If that's part of the plot, like if that is necessary, then yes, I could totally see that happening. But if you just thrown it in random because they're on a date, I don't care.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. Yeah,
but I know that's a really specific example, but
well, that's kind of when it happens a lot. Like, you know, in like you were saying, romances or, you know, folks going on a date, they're always talking about the
romance
food.
sub-arc.
Yeah, and it's if we're talking about books like Water for Chocolate or Chocolat, all these chocolate books, you know, chocolate's very important to books. But you know that concept,
that's different. That's that's there for a reason.
Yeah, it's very important.
This gratuitous descriptions of food is not there for a reason most of the time. And the ones that I don't know, maybe I've read ones and haven't had a problem with it because yes, it was part of it. I didn't even think twice about it. But the ones that just are jarring in the middle, I'm just like, no, I don't care about this.
Yeah. Well, I think you notice it more when it's out of place. If it works, then it's seamless. It just kind of flows right in.
Their trusted reader should have told them something.
Yes. Exactly. Do you need this description of this pot pie? It just makes people hungry and mad. Do you explore any other kind of multimedia or any other kind of sources when you're like, do you ever I know some folks really like watching documentaries when they're working on something. Like they will find different documentaries on different streaming services and just kind of go through those and then treat that as research and apply it to their projects. I could totally do that.
If I was writing a story that actually had a documentary that I could watch. Yeah. Because I write mostly science fiction and fantasy. Yeah, I could totally get behind like a documentary. I haven't done it myself personally yet, but I could get behind that. Yes, 100%.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I agree. I think that would be a useful way to do some research. Podcasts too, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I think folks probably use podcasts, and I listen to multiple podcasts that I feel like would come in handy for me, actually. I can think of one right now. I mean, it's no secret that I've been talking about how music is important to my writing, and my current story, music plays a huge role. It's like central to the story. And there is a podcast called No Dogs in Space that I listen to very regularly. And it's a music podcast. It's the same folks who do Last Podcast on the Left. If people listen to that, I really like Last Podcast on the Left. It's true crime and whatnot. But No Dogs in Space is just nonfiction music history. And the first season was all about punk, and now they're doing a mini season about Beastie Boys, and I don't know where they're going to go next. So I'm very excited for that.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. And as someone who loves music and loves music history, it's
and I can see where it would be integral because music is such a vital part to the story you're writing. Like I agree that podcast could be multimedia writing. Research.
Yeah, there's so many historical podcasts too, or podcasts that touch on history, podcasts that touch on science, art, all kinds of things. There are academics that do podcasts. There are professionals or people working in the field. So they can be very trusted sources, I think.
Yeah, I could totally see that. One other thing I use that I counted as multimedia research, I'm not sure somebody else would. Well, at least when I have a story that has multiple characters in it, like the one I'm writing now, it has two main characters, and every other chapter is about the every other character. So I found a program called Aeon that is timelines.
Oh,
so cool. I can track different times. Like the story happens over the course of like 24 hours, but they're experiencing it kind of sort of at the same times, but also kind of diverges a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's helpful to keep track of, okay, so from 3 to 4, character 1 was here, but character 2 from 3:30 to 4:45 was over here doing this. It's just, it's helpful because eventually they do have to meet in the middle. Well, not really. Eventually they'll meet towards the end. But it's helpful to know how things go together and fit together. Like, so I count as multimedia because I can also attach GPS to it and pictures. I mainly use it for the timeline sorts, which is nice. It's actually built for writers. You can actually name a character and locations, like where they are at certain locations at certain times. It's super powerful. But that is part of my multimedia research collective.
That tool sounds really useful because I don't actually write a lot of multi-narrative projects. I don't usually work that way. Not to say I won't, though, in the future. And now that I have learned about this very helpful sounding tool, I will probably be less scared to try it.
It is very helpful. I tried to do it out on paper a couple times before I ended up. It's not a free program. It is a paid program. But before I broke down basically and bought the program, I had a trial version, and it was so good that basically everything else I was looking at just never really measured up to it. And I tried doing it on paper a couple times, which sounds simple enough. But when you've got lots of elements working together. It was really hard to keep track of.
Yeah.
And this is just, I haven't mapped the whole story out in it. What I do is I take chunks. Like when I'm starting a chunk of chapters, like maybe when I'm starting a batch of like 4 new chapters, I'll go in and plot out those 14 chapters in the timeline. Just so I remember where they're at and how they're heading, and then so I know where they need to meet up at a certain point. You know, I need to know where the timelines converge a bit.
It's also, to me, it seems like it would be important to keep track of what different characters know when, depending on what kind of story you're telling. You know, if there are big reveals, if there are secrets that are being kept from one another, or, you know, if it's kind of there's a mystery vibe, people are discovering things, that tends to get lost in my brain. Yes. If I'm trying to have multiple people, like, I
actually hadn't thought about using the program that way, but I just found myself this morning during my writing session, going back and being like, wait, has he said this yet, or do I just know this is happening later? So yes, it sometimes it's hard to keep track of that stuff, especially when they're so in your head. Like the character just lives in your head, and you're like, wait, does he know this yet?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I know this, but does he know it yet?
Yeah, and you know, it's totally different trying to do all of that with like note cards. I love using note cards for many things in my writing.
But it gets messy, and it gets messy fast.
It's so messy, and you just don't. You get to a point where you don't have enough space.
I used to totally do the note card thing, and then but then you'd like lose one, God forbid. And you're like, wait, what happened to that? But then they get so ungainly. You have like rubber bands and just
I know.
It just
and you can't spread them out.
No,
like you get to a certain
easily.
point where you have so many that you can't actually spread them out and get a good visual anymore. You just drowned in them.
I'm not a good enough chronicler, note taker in a notebook where I can like keep an index.
Right.
Like I know some people do that, and that's amazing to me. Which my book recommendation actually involves part of that. But yeah, I'm not a good enough chronicler that I can do that, because all that information, like, it's just papers and papers and papers and papers, and then how do you reference back, and then how do you find them again, and what page are they on? I mean, excuse me, on the like even my podcast notebook, I have sticky tabs telling me what we're discussing anywhere in episodes, but I tried doing that in a notebook, doing research before I found this program basically to help me out with it, or like a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It just gets too ungainly.
Yes, it really does. It grows out of control very quickly.
And with something you can have put together, and then you can filter results by, and you just see like just Tad's timeline and just where he's going, who he's interacting with, because you can put in characters too, and like, okay, he interacts with character A and character B here, but over here it's only character B. Like that is so helpful to know.
Yeah. This sounds
keep track of it.
Amazing.
You know it, but it's helpful to keep track of it.
Exactly.
I highly recommend it. I'll put it in the show notes.
Please do, because I'm going to be clicking on that link myself.
I think it's
right now.
Oh, go ahead.
Right now, I don't really have much in the way of organization. I pretty much just will do an outline and, barely, and then I just like go to town, and then I use note cards, especially when it comes to revisions. I use note cards a lot in revisions, and I'm sure one day we'll do an episode about how we revise. But I follow, there's an author, Susan Dennard, who has like all of these resources on her website. She writes the Wind Witch is one of her books. Wind Witch? I don't know. She has all these resources on her website for writers and different stages of writing, and I have found her suggestions on revision very helpful, and it's pretty dependent on color coding and note cards, and I have enjoyed that so far, but we'll see how it goes as I kind of continue on in my writing journey. I might need to find something different.
Maybe the color coding reminds me of writing tip I heard once. I don't remember which it was. It was either like a YouTube video or I read it somewhere, but when you're writing dialogue with multiple characters, you write each character in their own color. So you can make sure that they're all saying, they all need to be in the conversation, or you can cut one out or something if they're not talking enough.
Yeah, it's nice to have those visuals because it's a quick reminder.
Mm-hmm. I think I was doing that once. My husband was like, "What are you doing?" I had to explain the whole concept to him.
I'm coloring. Thanks.
I'm trying to figure out if Henry really needs to be in this scene or not, because he's not saying much. But what he's saying is important, so that means he needs to talk more.
Yes. I need more green on this page. Can't you see?
Right. I need to figure out where Henry can sit for talk. So how do you feel about mind maps?
I don't like them. Weirdly, because I am a visual person, but they just I feel cluttered. I don't know. I prefer lists, I guess. I prefer lists.
I think I'm with you. Like, a mind map just reminds me of like the giant cork board you see somebody in like a thriller have with all the red string that ties things together.
Yeah, but get lost.
I can appreciate it for what it is, that you're just mind mapping. I don't know. You're just mapping things out as they flow together, and then you have different, you can put the different arcs in there, and they each have their different color codedness.
Yeah. To
show you where they fit together and stuff. And I can see where that would be helpful, but personally, I have a hard time with them. I just, they're too unorganized for me.
Yes. I feel that way too.
It's too cluttered. Just like it's a mind map, and I understand what it's supposed to do, but when I look at it, my brain has a hard time focusing on any one thing. It's too much for me to take in.
Yeah. And you just get overwhelmed, and then that doesn't help you at all. That doesn't help organize your thoughts or make anything clear. It does the exact opposite. I haven't used mind maps creatively in a long time. I might give it a try again because, as I am diving back in, I'm kind of trying everything again because I don't actually have to be reacquainted with myself as a writer. So kind of forcing myself to do all kinds of things. So I will reevaluate the mind map situation, but back when I was writing heavily, I did not use them. They weren't something that were helpful to me. Normally, I will just do kind of a loose outline, and as I start writing, I do kind of a combination of writing with bullet points for things that I think I want to go in certain places. That's kind of how my first drafts end up being. It's like kind of a fleshed out, more extended outline, combination prose and outline. And so it's like a 0.5 draft, I guess. And then I can go through and fill in those spaces where I just have like bullet points and kind of make it a full thing. But that's like how I organize. The mind map, I mean, maybe I will like it more now. I have no idea. It's been a while, so I'll give it a shot and see what happens.
Yesterday I read an article about an indie author who was writing the third story in their trilogy, and it was just falling flat. They just couldn't figure out what was going wrong with it, and they were saying that they used a mind map at that point to map out the different levels of plot, and that's how they found out that the romantic subplot wasn't going anywhere, and it was dragging everything else behind.
Oh, this is a fascinating point, actually, that mind maps might be really well used as
maybe
a diagnosis tool.
Point. Yes.
Yeah.
If you're having problems.
When we were talking about writer's block and how that could be a symptom of something bigger in your story, your plot structure.
And in this instance, the mind map helped the author identify that they were having a problem. And then once they figured it out, they were able to fix their book.
That is really interesting to think about. And I'm going to store that away in my head as a tool in my bag to pull out if I have to ever diagnose.
I know. Well, I read that. I'm like, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try that like on like draft 3. Just do it out and make sure everything goes together well. Like it. I don't like maybe I should say I don't like them at the beginning, but who knows? Maybe they're more useful at the end of a project to make sure.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That as a tool to make sure everything is going the direction it's supposed to be going in.
Because, as we've mentioned in this episode so far, you can kind of lose track. You can kind of lose track of everything. Just
it's what an outline is supposed to do, but an outline is insufficient sometimes.
Yes. Agreed. And as you start writing, things take on a life of their own. Your characters might kind of inform, or, people will say your characters tell you who they are or take you in different directions. So that outline, could be done with great intentions.
Right. Or like last episode where we were talking about the writer's block, you realize there's something major wrong, and then that outline is worthless.
Exactly. It was for the old project, and now you need one for the new project.
Suddenly you need another half of an outline because this didn't work. It worked on paper in your outline, but it suddenly doesn't work anymore. Once you actually get it out and the characters start talking about it and doing it, you realize, well, that just doesn't go together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is something everyone should think about. Organizing doesn't just have to be for the beginning.
No,
it's
an
ongoing process.
Organizing is the entire project. You reevaluate.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it sort of kind of goes together. One of my favorite books is The Sparrow, and one of the characters in there is asking someone else, like, well, how did you stay married all this time? Like, I don't know, maybe they were married for like 40 years or something. And the wife was like, well, every 10 years you reevaluate and you look at the person. And they're not the same person you married, but do you accept the person now and then move on and continue being married to them?
Wow. Yeah.
It kind of veers me off path a little bit here in my topic, but it's like every once in a while you have to make a break and you reevaluate your story and you make sure it's going in a direction you're comfortable.
Yes. This is kind of why I don't do formal outlines in the beginning, because I don't really know where it's going. And I gotta let it lead me to where it feels good, at least for that beginning portion. And then it's easier for me to do the reevaluation and be a little bit more structured with my next pass. And then for each pass I do, I become more and more structured until I get to the actual revision portion where I'm very structured.
I think that's actually how everybody writes.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine.
I can honestly say that I have never written a story start to finish based completely 100% on the first outline.
I've never met anybody
It always
who does.
changes. I think that's how everybody, like, the first draft is a very, very rough draft of your outline, and then it just changes and tightens and tightens and tightens and tightens, and eventually you get a story. That's worth reading.
Yes.
I mean, you've always had a story, but at the end, eventually you have one you want to share with somebody else.
And that's key. That's it right there. One you want other people to read.
No, my goal in life is to have someone want to write fan fiction about my story.
Ooh,
that is my ultimate goal. That is my ultimate goal. Like, yes, I do want to write a story, and I want to write a story because I can't find the story I want to read, so I'm writing the story I want to read. But ultimately, once you get past all of that, and you're just looking at having a story, I want it to be good enough to have someone want to write fan fiction about.
Yeah, a story that inspires more stories from other people.
Which then you legally cannot read.
Yeah.
There's a famous story about Marion Zimmer Bradley. Back before the internet, fans were so inspired by her stuff, they would write stories about her work and then send them to her.
Oh, wow.
And she had to send them back, like, unopened, or, like, she kept them somewhere unopened because she legally could not read it.
Yeah, you don't want to go there.
What if a sequel accidentally one of their ideas, like, planted a seed in her head, and then you have all this, like, oh, who owns this, who came up with the idea? I mean, so if someone writes fan fiction of my story, I'll be very flattered, but I cannot read it.
Yeah, I mean, you'd just be opening yourself up to all kinds of litigation.
I know.
No one has time for that, thanks.
But that's ultimately what I want to happen. I want it to be good enough that somebody loves it enough to write more stories about it.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful goal.
I do too, thank you. All right, let's close this up and go to some recommendations.
Awesome. Well, I think I recommended enough at the beginning of this when I was talking about The Only Good Indians. So I will use that for my recommendation.
Cheater. That feels like cheating.
Freshly branded with its StokerCon. It's a Bram Stoker Award. Oh, The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. It's bloody. It's scary. It's fucking brilliant. All right, Deb, what do you got?
Okay, so my recommendation this week is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. And I know everybody loves this book, or at least I am under the impression that everybody loves this book.
I have only heard good things.
I read it in like 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's pretty thick, isn't it?
It's not super thick. It's maybe like an inch and a half, maybe.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a doorstop. Maybe that's just because I'm thinking of her past work, which is a doorstop.
No, this isn't super. It might actually only be an inch. I'm like looking at my fingers, knowing like what an inch or an inch and a half is. Each finger is like half an inch. And anyways, so Piranesi is. It's mind blowing. Like, it's I don't know. It's not mind blowing, I suppose, but it's intricate. It's very intricate, and it's an exploration, and it's a little bit of magic,
like that.
but also a lot of bit of magic somehow at the same time. Like it kind of skirts it as a little bit of science, but it's really interesting. In case you don't know what it's about a man who lives in this infinite labyrinth of basically a museum. I kind of pictured it as a museum. It's a very tall marble. I can only think of museum. It's like the walls are lined with white marble statues, and they're like sometimes like 3 columns high, and basically every wall is lined with statues. And there's windows that let in natural light. But it's this infinite labyrinth of rooms. Like, they all have doors at each end, and then there's doors on the east and west and north and south ends of all these rooms. And there's multiple stories. In the upper stories, there's clouds and it'll rain. And in the lower stories, there's the sea. And some of the rooms are dilapidated, and they're broken, and there's pools with fish in them and stuff. And there's birds in this place. And Piranesi is only one of 2 humans that live there. And he wonders what it would be like to have a world full of humans. And he's something I was talking about earlier about documenting. He's very into his journals. He has an extensive list of journals about what he writes, like how he experiences, and he's named all the statues. He has a really intense way of experiencing what he calls the house. And that's this labyrinthine museum. He has like almost a spiritual connection with it. And it's a book basically unraveling the mystery of the house.
Ooh.
And it's really well done. There is a small cast of characters, but each of them is very defined. Like, you can see them in your head. Actually, it got to the point where I could see who I'm going to call the main antagonist in my dreams. Like, when I was done with the book, like, he was a character in my dreams. Like, my brain just made him. He was, the characterization of him and the description was just so like precise that my brain was able to fabricate. I know, my brain was able to fabricate this man and insert him in my dreams.
Wow.
Yes. He was also the antagonist in my dreams, but...
Well. You just talked about that book in a way that was different from... So I've heard a lot of people talk about that book. I have not read it myself, but from all of the other people that I've heard talk about it, no one has actually mentioned, like, the how... Like, the environment.
Really?
I don't know. You talked about it in a way that was different than the way I've heard talked about it before.
One of the characters.
Yeah, I don't know. You gave me more of an understanding of what that book is about, and I actually wasn't terribly interested in reading it before, but I'm way more interested in reading it now.
I blew through it. It was that good, and I highly recommend it. It's not super wordy. It's easy to read. It just kind of flows together nicely. There is some kind of disjointedness in the beginning just because you're thrust into this environment and it's so alien to what we have. It takes a little bit to work together what everything is, and that's exactly what the story is about, is piecing it together. And it's told through Piranesi's journal entries. Like, there is no description of the house except how he describes it. He maybe an unreliable narrator because you're seeing everything through his eyes, and he has a bias and prejudice against some things. But his character is pure enough, I guess is a good way to say, that he is a fairly reliable narrator. You can trust what he says actually be well written. But like I said, it is a little disjointed just being thrust into the world because you have no idea what's going on. Yeah. But it works together really well, and I really super duper duper recommend this book.
Awesome. It's on the list now. It's on there for real.
So you'll read it in like 4 years?
Oh my God, yeah. The TBR, she grows.
I know. It's actually gotten to the point my reading list. I keep jumping ahead of it because remember we were talking about how I didn't know Practical Magic was a movie or a book. It was a movie first. Well, I got the book. And I've immediately started reading the book. I'm now halfway through it. And I can totally see what you mean. They're two different entities. And I'm not sure if I like the book yet because I really loved the movie. But
I know.
It's so different. But yeah, it just jumped to the top of my list in front of everything else.
Sometimes that happens, you know, it just, something calls to you. And I think that's fine to grab whatever's calling to you, because then you're reading, you know, you're excited to read. So you're gonna,
that's basically how I spend my evenings, is reading these days.
Yeah.
Except for last night. Last night I just needed to veg out and watch a movie.
Yeah, well, we need a lot of that too these days. Oh, the brain, it needs a break from time to time.
Sometimes. Well, that's about as much time as we have today. We're going to put all our notes and examples in the show notes, which you can find on our website, readandwritepodcast.com, or you can check us out on all the social medias under the same name. So, catch us next Wednesday when we're going to talk about
our June roundup, which I think is going to be really interesting because we're not just talking about stuff that we read in June. We're talking about just all kinds of things that we have consumed and things that we enjoy.
Right. It's not so much a podcast episode about a topic. It's more like what we're reading, what we're writing, and everything.
And everything in between.
I know. Yes, exactly. We're living true to our name. Once a month, we're going to round up and tell our audience what we wrote, how much of it we wrote, if Jocelyn wants to go there, or what we're writing about more in depth, and everything we consumed, media, books, music, you name it.
Yeah, it's going to be more of a relaxed, not like these
not
aren't. Yeah, but it's more unstructured, really just kind of like sharing. And it's a nice way to keep ourselves accountable. Myself especially, I would really like to be able to have a writing update for everybody. So let's keep Jocelyn accountable.
That's good. And eventually Jocelyn will join us for the 6 a.m. writing sessions too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I will.
Where if you want to catch us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, specifically me, not Jocelyn yet, are doing 6 a.m. writing sessions on YouTube live streams. But if 6 a.m. is too early for you, you can always check us out at 2 p.m. because YouTube does video on demand. It'll just be added to our library. So until then, stay safe.
Keep reading.
Keep writing.
And go do what you do best.
I love that line. It's so cheesy, but man, it's so good.
It's very inspirational.
Yes. All right. Good night, Jocelyn.
Have a good one, Deb. I'll see you later.